So today well, before I start my talk, I'm going to do some advertising. You've heard me talk over and over again about our conference that we're hosting here this year, the BC Historical Federation Conference. It will be held in town from May 26th to May 28th. There's a variety of events going on during the conference. Registration is required for all of them, and there's a cost for most of the events as well. But we're starting with a welcome reception here on the Thursday. There's going to be Grey Monk Wineries is going to be doing a wine tasting, and we'll have hors d'oeuvres from La Baguette, and Jacqueline Daniluk and Lida Carey will be performing. So it'll be a really lovely evening. It's $20 per person for that one. There's a Friday evening, a dedication at the Railway Museum of the new Walter Moberly Monument. If you haven't noticed it when you're driving by, it's just in front of the one of the rotary plows there. There's the huge rocks with the Surveyor's Transit on top. We're going to do the dedication there on Friday, May 27th at 7:30. And there will be beer from the beer tasting from Mount Begbie, and entertainment from some of the local actors portraying local history scenarios. That one's also $20. And then the Saturday evening, there's the BC Book Awards banquet at the Revelstoke Mountain Resort at the Revelation Lodge. It's $60 per person. It's going to be a really lovely banquet. The Parks Canada is bringing their green screen there, which is always fun. Bob Rogers Trio will be performing. The Lieutenant Governor will be there to hand out the book awards. So again, a really lovely evening. So any of these you can register here or online at bchistory.ca, and you can see the rest of the program there. The Friday morning we're going to have keynote speeches at the Performing Arts Center. Our keynote speaker is John Woods on Land of Thundering Snow. If you missed that last year, it's really a fabulous talk. It's worth seeing that. And I'll obviously be talking about bits of history throughout the thing as well. So you can check out the full schedule at bchistory.ca, or come and talk to us here at the museum for more details. Registration closes on May 19th, so we need to get registered pretty quickly on that one. Okay, so I've got a whack of pages here and lots of photos. So talking about the mayors of Revelstoke. Revelstoke was incorporated as a city in March of 1899, and our first mayor was Frank McCarty. This is a picture of the first city council in 1899. So there's Frank McCarty in the middle, Alderman W.F. Craig, Alderman F.B. Wells, Alderman Thomas Graham, Alderman William Brown, Dr. W.B. McKechnie, and Thomas Kilpatrick. The newspaper on the day of the election, the headline said, McCarty our mayor, returns of the first municipal election, full list of the aldermen, the lucky 7 who sit at the council board for 1899 and run the town, and the other 7 who will sit at home and tell how much better they could have done it. That was the newspaper headline. McCarty was born in Wisconsin, in the U.S. in 1854. He came to Revelstoke with his wife following railway construction across the country. Sam Needham remembers them at when they lived at Lagan, Lake Louise, where they were cutting wood fuel for the old wood burner locomotives of the day. So they came and settled in Revelstoke. They were here in the 1880s. They had what was known as a temperance boarding house on CPR Hill. And then McCarty opened a butcher store, built it in 1890 on the road leading to the station, Track Street. It was a butcher and wholesale meat business, cold storage. And they also added in later a couple of other businesses in the building. There's a drugstore here. And W.M. Lawrence, who later built Lawrence Hardware, had his first hardware store in the McCarty building. And it was there for several years. He also had mining interests. He had a 60-acre farm across the Illecillewaet River. Later, they were also Roman Catholics, which is a little bit significant that the first mayor was a Roman Catholic, because there was definitely a split between the Protestants and Catholics in a town this size. So I think just his business interests and his business acumen maybe overrode his religion in that case. But when they had their boarding house on CPR Hill, they would they had the priest would hold mass there until they built their church on Mackenzie Avenue in 1893. He was later had a livery station, and then that originally, of course, included horses and carts, but later included cars. So here he was bringing a Studebaker car into town in 1915. Their house was built on Mackenzie Avenue. It started construction in 1899 and was completed in 1900. The newspaper of October 12th, 1900 says, "New home of Revelstoke's first mayor. It takes the lead for solid workmanship, comfort, and elegance of design. The second floor had 5 large bedrooms and a bathroom, and the woodwork was cedar and fir. The contractor was John Kernahan, who was a well-known contractor in town. He built the grill hall and also the Imperial Bank that's no longer there at the corner of First and Mackenzie. He also built one of the lodges at Lake Louise. Was quite a well-known contractor in the province. The stone basement of this building was built by E.C. Fromey. The rocks were all local stone, and the walls in that basement are 2 feet thick. This is his where he built his livery, and then he actually had a steam laundry in that building as well. That was at the corner of Victoria and Norton, where the Cheers Beer and Wine store is now. And he passed away in 1920. This was his grave at the cemetery. And when I started doing cemetery tours there several years ago, I noted that he didn't have a headstone. So it was actually Ruby Cameron who contacted the city and said that it was shameful that our first mayor didn't have a headstone. So they eventually put in a new headstone on his grave. During his term, the first bylaws of the city were adopted. The city was divided into 3 wards. So there were actually, as in bigger cities, they have wards. Well, Revelstoke actually had 3 different wards at that time. They were establishing all the first services, so they had the first medical health officer, the city engineer, and other positions, and they selected the site for the first fire hall, which was completed in 1900. He had 3 daughters and 1 son. His eldest daughter died of measles in 1897 at the age of 8. Their daughter Florence was known for, the family was quite musical, and Florence played the piano for the silent movies at the local theaters. Their son John was born in 1899. He died in 1923 during the construction of the Big Eddy Bridge. He fell from the bridge and was drowned. Our first mayor, it's another view of their house in the 1920s. You get a better view of that original, we call Witch's Peak there, which was later, they put a new roof on and that removed the peak and changed the roof line. And then, of course, the upper and lower front verandas that are not there any longer as well. The second mayor was Armand Smith, and he was born in 1870. Came to Revelstoke in 1880s, who was employed in the CPR shops. He became a partner in the C.B. Hume Company, and C.B. Hume had his first store across the tracks on Track Street. It was a general store. In the fall of 1896, he started a bakery in the 100 block of Victoria Road East, so around, just around the corner on Victoria from Mackenzie, about where the Regent parking lot area is now, just around from the Bears. He also owned the Canada Drug and Bookstore, which was built right on the corner of Victoria. He was married to Margaret Adela Banting, who was a sister of Sarah Dickey, an early family here. Their home was right next door to the museum. It was built in there probably in the early 1900s. And the Dickey home, so Mrs. Smith's sister, their home was originally here, and it was later moved to make way for the post office. In the fall of 1902, he went to Ontario and then Manitoba due to ill health. He died in Manitoba on January 22nd, 1903 from diphtheria. During his time in office, he oversaw a bylaw to regulate and enforce the cutting down of trees in the city. And they also changed the original street names of John, James, and George to first, second, and third. So if you look at the original maps, the first, second, and third were John, James, and George, and I have no idea who they were. Could have been kings, but we're not sure about that, because if you look at some of the other names, Charles follows that, but Douglas doesn't. So we're not really sure where the names originally came from. He was also oversaw the purchase of land for the cemetery, which was already being used for a cemetery at that time, but because the city wasn't established, it wasn't under city control until 1900. And they also, during that time, the Big Bend Wagon Road was completed to the boat landing north of the Revelstoke Canyon. And they also put a curfew into effect for children under the age of 15. They didn't find out what time the curfew was. And Thomas Kilpatrick was mayor in 1901 and 1913. He was born in Simcoe, Ontario in 1857. He arrived in Revelstoke in 1885 from the west, walking across the original toll bridge. He began work with the CPR and bridge construction, and over the next 16 years, he rose from the rank of bridgeman to a foreman, and finally to a superintendent of the Revelstoke Division, from Kamloops to Lagan, or Lake Louise. He became known as an authority on fighting snow on the railway through the mountain passes. And he was noted for maintaining uninterrupted traffic over Stony Creek Bridge while the new steel arch span was being installed. He was on the first city council in 1899 as an alderman. He was the CPR superintendent in 1910 when the Rogers Pass snowslide occurred. And we have the original files for that incident. And there's several letters, personal letters that he wrote to family members of the men who had been killed. There's one in particular, a series of correspondence between him and a woman in Ireland whose son had been killed, and the whole series of letters back and forth are really quite touching. He actually took it upon himself to write personal letters to the family members. He was the first president of the Revelstoke Hospital Society and continued in that role until 1920 when they left Revelstoke. That hospital society oversaw the construction of the first Queen Victoria Cottage Hospital. They completed it in 1902, and Elsie Mckennon came from Prince Edward Island as the first matron. The hospital was on what local people know as the hospital site where Cooper's is now. But when they built the brick hospital, they moved this one over to where the Legion is now, and it later became the first Legion building. But Elsie Mckennon, who came as the first matron, a year after she came, she married Thomas Kilpatrick. And even in the minutes of the hospital board, there was some good-natured ribbing of Kilpatrick for taking their matron away, because at that time married women weren't able to work. So they, when he married their matron, they had to find a new one. He was elected as mayor in 1901, but he resigned in May of that year when he was appointed the CPR superintendent. In his 1900 term, he oversaw a bylaw to borrow over almost $70,000 to purchase the Revelstoke Water, Light and Power Company, although the actual purchase didn't take place that year. And then in his 1913 term, there was a bylaw to raise $20,000 for a high school building, which was completed in 1914. They eventually moved to the coast, and he died in 1939, at the age of 82. William Martin Brown was he took over the, oh, sorry, that should be 1900. No, that's right, 1901. He took over the term from Kilpatrick, and he was born in Yorkshire, England in 1838, so he was the older of a lot of the men who were on the early council. His family moved to the USA, and at the age of 22 he crossed the plains of the United States with a group of settlers to settle in the Rouge River Valley in southern Oregon. He was there for a few years and then came up into Canada and was prospecting and ranching in the Lillooet and the Caribou area. And he was the first member of Parliament for the Lillooet district in 1874. He came to Revelstoke in 1885 and established the Columbia House Hotel, which was the first hotel on Front Street in 1885. He also had summer property at St. Leon and was involved in the first resort and hot springs facility that was built there. He had mining interests in the Mcleod Creek mine. In 1892, he was the captain of the 1st Fire Brigade, and that's him right here, with his hand on the ladder. The 1st Fire Brigade was formed in Farwell in the Front Street in 1892. Then later, the upper part of town, they felt that they weren't getting good enough fire service, so they started a 2nd Fire Brigade for the upper part of town. He was a member of the Board of Trade, a charter member of the Revelstoke Club, which is a men's club. In 1896, he was one of the original directors of the Revelstoke Water, Light and Power Company, which was organized by William Cowan. His daughter Adeline was born in Lytton in 1873 to a First Nations woman. And Adeline came here, but her mother didn't, and we know nothing, not been able to find any details about Adeline's mother. But Adeline worked with her father in the hotel as a hostess in the hotel, and she married a local fellow, James Jameson, in 1902. And members of the Jameson family that are still here are from that family. W.M. Brown ran for provincial parliament in 1890, but he lost to J.M. Kelly. And Kelly, in his notes account, talks of a little, when they were on the campaign trail, they were in Nelson, and Brown had produced this letter proving that, or as he said, proving that Kelly was in the pocket of the government of the day, that he wasn't independent as he claimed. And Kelly stood up and said that his heart was black and he was a liar, and turned the tables, and he won by 1 vote over Brown. In 1899, he was on the first city council and then took over mayor in 1900 when Kilpatrick resigned. There was a railway strike during his term, and Mayor Brown put his full support behind the strikers. During his term, the city agreed to pay $150 to erect an archway at Vancouver on the occasion of the visit of the Duke of York to the city. And you can see there's the archway there. It's a little hard to see behind the bunting, but it says Revelstoke Mineral Exhibit. In later years, he went back to Medford, Oregon, and he died there in 1915. Martin J. O'Brien, I didn't have a portrait picture of him. There's Martin J. O'Brien at his family home at Mackenzie Avenue and 6th Street. For years we thought that was Mrs. Patrick's house at the corner of 4th and Mackenzie, but then when we did the research in the tax records, we discovered that O'Brien's house was at 6th. So this is actually that yellow and brown house. So what they did was they took the roof off at some point and added additional story onto the top of it. But it's definitely that house. So Martin O'Brien was born in Ontario in 1862, and he came to Donald in 1886, operating a wholesale liquor business. It was said that he brought the first consignment of whiskey to British Columbia, or probably the first legal consignment of whiskey to British Columbia over the prairies with a police escort. He came to Revelstoke around 1894 and began the manufacture of soda water at a factory here and also in Vernon. In 1900, he organized the Revelstoke Wine and Spirit Company, which was located on Campbell Avenue, where the RCMP office is now. He was married to Charlotte Dunsmuir, and they had 3 children. During his time in office, there was a grant of $450 towards the local militia, and they finalized the purchase of the Water, Light and Power Company assets for $62,500. And that included the power plant on Illisilliwit and the waterworks as well. The mayor suggested that the empty schoolhouse, which was opened in 1891 on what's the playing field of the former Mountain View School property, that it be moved to the vacant lot at Mackenzie Avenue and 2nd Street as the city hall. So that was, before that they were meeting in the fire hall and possibly the courthouse as well. They also established what you could consider a forerunner to the Street Fest. They paid the Revelstoke Independent Band $5 for every Saturday night performance that they did between June and September in the summers. The mayor's salary was raised to $500 in 1903. O'Brien later moved to Vernon, died there in 1940. Hugh Brown was mayor in 1904 and 1907. He was born in Scotland in 1858. And trained as an engineer and managed his father's paper box factory in Scotland. He came to Winnipeg in 1880 and was working between Manitoba and Ontario. He was doing mining and various other business ventures. He came to Revelstoke in 1889 and worked for the CPR before going into business. He was also a member of the Revelstoke Board of Trade. That's him right there. This is meeting in the old courthouse building. And he built the Union Hotel, which is, so this is Mackenzie, and Connaught isn't really much of a street there. This is Campbell. This is the building on the corner of, across the street on the corner of First and Campbell, where there's an accountant's office in there now. It was originally built as the First Imperial Bank. And then this is the Union Hotel. And it was built where Home Hardware is now. So it opened in July of 1891. And then in January of 1900, it was destroyed by fire. The newspaper said the basement of the hotel was filled with flames, and the guests at dinner in the house discovered smoke coming up through the floor of the dining room. The number 2 fire brigade was soon on the scene, and number 1 was notified, and but for a few minutes delay in waiting for a team would have arrived sooner. The building wasn't able to be saved. It said in less than half an hour from the discovery of the fire, flames and smoke were pouring out of every window in the building, and the firemen turned their attention to the surrounding buildings. They managed to save the Imperial Bank and the building on the corner across the street, which later became the Climax Hotel. And it said, shortly before the walls collapsed, the flames reached to an enormous height, lighting up the dark mountain sides for many miles around. At 8 o'clock it was all over, and there was nothing left of the Union Hotel but a few heaps of smoldering timbers. He later built the brown block at Connaughton First, which is, there's the hair salon in there, whichever one that is, and the Beyond Gifts and Art First. That was all the brown block. So it's actually one of the earlier remaining buildings in the area. It was built in 1900. And then he also built and operated the Union Cigar Factory, which is, now this is on First Street. This is actually the corner where the side wall of Home Hardware is right now. And we actually have a box from his cigar factory in our collection. He was also the president of the Board of Trade for 4 terms and the lieutenant commander of Company 5 of Rocky Mountain Rangers. He was an avid curler and was instrumental in having the first rink built. During his office, 2 detention cells were constructed in City Hall basement under the supervision of the police commissioner. And the town joined the Union of Canadian Municipalities, and they borrowed $30,000 to improve, extend, and increase water and light plants. And they authorized the construction of a sewage system. H.A. Brown was married to Elizabeth Knowles, a widow with 2 children. They later moved to Salmon Arm, and he died there in 1923. John Mcleod, who's seen on the end with his family, was born in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia in 1860. He trained as a painter in Boston. He moved to Kamloops sometime after 1885, where he was doing fancy paintwork jobs on stagecoaches. He joined the CPR in Donald as a painter, so painting engines, and then came to Revelstoke in 1899 when Donald closed as a divisional point. Their family home was one of the houses from Donald that was dismantled and moved to Revelstoke. It was rebuilt at 219 2nd Street East. He married a woman named Sarah, who was the former school teacher at Donald, and they had 8 children. The newspaper in 1901 talked about a little accident to Alderman Mcleod. He was an alderman at that time. It said, John Mcleod, painter in the CPR shops, and the well-known and popular alderman for Ward 1, was the victim of an accident on Wednesday evening, which can only be regarded as miraculous that it did not result more seriously. He had just finished painting an engine tender, and it was being moved by the shop hands through the shops. Mr. Mcleod was helping with the rest, and while so engaged, endeavored to pass between the moving tender and an upright placed alongside the track. As he darted between them, the tender caught him and rolled him round against the post in a space of not more than 10 inches. As soon as the awful pressure ceased, by the tender rolling him clear of the post, Mr. Mcleod fell senseless to the ground. Strangely enough, his medical attendant pronounced that although the squeeze to which he was submitted was awful, not a rib was broken. He says that he could feel his ribs moving inside his body like so many clasping fingers. He lost his job with the CPR during a strike when he refused to cross a picket line, and then went to work for the Pratolini Brothers construction company as a painter. During his time in office, permission was given to the Revelstoke, Trout Lake and Big Bend Telephone Company to lay wires underground, and a diphtheria outbreak caused the closing of schools and quarantines, and houses were disinfected by the medical officers. The city authorized $20,000 to improve and extend water and light plants, and he moved to Vancouver around 1918 and died there in 1925. Charles F. Lindmark was the mayor in 1908 to 1909. He was born in Sweden in 1865 and came to Revelstoke in 1888 via Chicago. He worked for the CPR And he learned English with the help of local policeman and government agent Jack Turcup. In 1890, he became a partner with Robert Howson, who had a furniture store and also a contracting business, and then took over a Teamster business in 1891. In the spring of 1892, he went into partnership with C.B. Hume in his general store on Track Street. I was involved with a lot of mining and lumber interests, and was one time was the president of Dominion Sawmills, which was a large lumber consortium, and they had their office on Victoria Road. It's later known as Arlington Court. And this is the city council in 1908. That's R.H. Sawyer, Don Hawker's great uncle. And Lawson was the city clerk, and Foote was later mayor in 1905. And it's W.W. LaFoe, local grocery store, and Lindemark, and Woodland, and Albert Stone. The Lindemark home, he married Amanda Anderson from Sweden in 1894. And then in 1907, they moved into the home at 706 Mackenzie Avenue, which is now the home of Dr. Ferrugia and Dr. McDonald. And they had two daughters, Ruth and Myrtle. There were a lot of entertainments, a lot of lawn socials were given at their home over the years. He was also the chairman of the school board, justice of the peace, the Sunday school superintendent for the Methodist Church. And here he is with the Methodist Church Junior Bible Club bowling team. And during his term as mayor, he was responsible, they were responsible for the concrete sidewalks in some of the city streets. They set a speed limit for automobiles. The first automobile came to Revelstoke in 1907, so they didn't say what the speed limit actually was, though. They borrowed $5,000 for improvements to the park and recreation grounds, which is where the playing fields at Queen Elizabeth Park are now, and also saw the construction of the Lindmark Trail to the summit of Mount Revelstoke before it was a national park. They moved to the coast, and he died in New Westminster in 1933. Dr. John Hamilton was the mayor from 1910 to 1911. He was born in Ontario in 1881, and he came out west with his father, who was working for the Canadian Pacific Railway. He graduated in medicine from the University of Toronto at the age of 21, and then worked, his father was in Nelson by that time, so he worked there as a doctor's assistant, and then got a job at the hospital in Arrowhead, and then eventually moved up to Revelstoke in 1906. He practiced medicine for the rest of his life, originally in partnership with Dr. Sutherland. During World War I, he signed up as a medical officer with the 54th Kootenai Battalion and saw service overseas until he was wounded and returned home in 1917. Their family home was at the corner of Mackenzie and 3rd Street. He was also magistrate for many years, and as well as a health officer and coroner. It's a case that came before him as the police magistrate in 1919. 3 Knights of the Road, as they were called, or hobos, were found prowling behind local businesses. Magistrate Hamilton imposed a sentence of 6 months each to Ocala Prison Farm, then told them that he would suspend the sentence for 20 minutes, and if they were found within the city limits at the end of that time, the sentence would be carried out. He married Mary Edwards, who was a niece of Lida Holton, in 1910, and they had three children, John, Marjorie, and Joan. He was very active in sports, particularly curling. He died on April 3rd, 1938 at the age of 57 at Enderby after attending the curling bonspiel at Vernon. And during his time in office, the chief of police was asked to notify owners of trees overhanging the sidewalks to keep them trimmed so that persons with umbrellas could pass under the branches. The mayor signed a petition to the provincial government to build a traffic bridge across the Columbia River. And that happened during his time. In 1910, they started that construction of the bridge. Again, Dr. Hamilton, but also Dr. Sutherland, who was mayor in 1912. Dr. William Henry Sutherland was born in Prince Edward Island in 1876. He was related to Lucy Maud Montgomery. He graduated in medicine in 1899 and did postgraduate work in Vienna, Austria, and also worked as a house surgeon at the Royal Victoria Hospital in Montreal. He came to Kamloops in 1902 and then to Revelstoke in 1903 as the superintendent and resident surgeon of the new Queen Victoria Cottage Hospital. He also had a lot of lumber and mining interests, and he served as a local magistrate. He was elected to the BC legislature in 1916, representing Revelstoke West Kootenay riding. He was a member of the legislature for 19 years, during which time he held the posts of Liberal Whip, Minister of Public Works, Minister of Mines, and Minister of Railways. Sutherland Falls, south of Revelstoke, was named after him. Who was the Minister of Public Works, was responsible for the building of the Arrowhead Revelstoke Road. He was actually trying to encourage the building of a highway through Rogers Pass, but at that time he wasn't successful. That didn't happen for many years later. This is him with at the opening of the Big Bend Highway in 1940. And during his time, the Queen Victoria Hospital construction began, and also the opening of the Mount Revelstoke Road. He died in Vancouver in 1945. Hector Mckennon, I actually did a whole talk on Hector Mckennon, so tons of information on him. He was mayor from 1914, from 1916 to 1919, and from 1925 to 1929. He was born in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia in 1878. A lot of our mayors were from either Ontario or Nova Scotia. He came with his family to Vancouver in the 1880s, and then came here in 1894, originally working as a fireman for the CPR. His brothers Joe and Leo came here as well. He had several business interests. He started the McKinnon's Pool Hall. He had originally a business on First Street, across the other side of what later became the McKinnon Building. And then in 1912, they completed the construction of the McKinnon Block, which until recently was the Nickelodeon Museum. And he had a pool hall there. They also had a bowling alley in the basement, and it was a cigar store as well. The newspaper, when it opened in February 1912, said, "This block is one of the best in the city and one of the best in the interior of BC." In 1917, he bought land at the junction of the Columbia and Illecillewaet rivers and started the Standard Dairy, which was in operation by his family until the area was flooded from the dam at Castlegar in the 1960s, and they had to, the house that you can see there was barged across the Illecillewaet and moved up, and it's now on Nickel Road by what was Jake and J Holdings. This is Mayor McKinnon when the Prince of Wales came here in, Mayor McKinnon and the Prince of Wales when they came here in 1919 to dedicate the plaque in memory of the fallen soldiers from World War I, and also unveiled a plaque on Mount Revelstoke. When he was alderman, when he first started as alderman, he came in a real platform of fiscal responsibility. He had, in 1911, it said, "Alder McKinnon hangs out red flag. As chairman of finance, he warns aldermen not to spend money not sanctioned by the council on penalty of personal responsibility." And then later that year, he actually removed phones from the homes of city officials. So the council this year must not go out of office with an overdraft, and if it is persisted in, then every one of you will be liable for the amount, for I'll not be a party to it. He said Alderman Mckennon got his axe to work at some little things in his department. He could not see why C.J. Ammon, the city clerk, why C.J. Ammon's residents and the residents of the fire chief and Mayor Hamilton's private office at the city hall should be supplied by phones, with phones at the expense of the city. The fire chief's phone was to be cut, provided he was that he was given an electric bell connecting him with the fire hall. So that would see an annual savings of $96 a year, cutting all those phones. So he ran for mayor 11 times. He was defeated once, acclaimed 5 times, and he won a mayoral race against an opponent 5 times. I have quite a bit more information on him, but as I said, I did a talk on him on his own at one time. He was seriously injured in a fire at their farm in July of 1929, and after a couple of days he died of his burns. His daughter Mary, who lived to the age of 100 and just died a couple of years ago, said that her father lived for a day after he was burned, and was able to call each member of the family and to talk to them before his death. They had been a very close family. So the newspaper on August 7th, 1929 proclaimed tragedy ends the active career of Mayor Mckennon. He passed away on July 31st, 1929 at the age of 51. And then in 1930, he was honored with the unveiling of the water fountain at the Queen Victoria Park. And the fountain's still there, but I don't think it's operational at this time. And this is his grave at the Mountain View Cemetery. Kind of running out of time. We could, maybe I'll just run through the slides quickly. This is W.A. Foote, was mayor in 1915, and he was a builder. He bought up quite a few of the properties on 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th Street, and would build houses on them and then sell the house and property. So he was responsible for a lot of the houses in those blocks. This was his family home at the corner of 6th and Orton. And you can see in those blocks that there'll be like 2 or 3 homes together built of very similar plans. So you can see like little clumps of houses out of the same building plans. He was a fire chief in 1904. That's him right there. And eventually left. Walter Buse was the mayor from 1920 to 1922, and Buse was a druggist. He had his first store, first store on Front Street, and then he had a store built with the building that's now WK Garden was built for him in 1902, and then he later moved to the Housen block, and of course that was the drugstore. It was later became Donaldson's Drugs at that location until not that many years ago when Stephen built the current building. And he was also a hockey player. That's came on the end. He was very athletic. He did one of the early climbs of Mount Bigby in 1915. Did a lot of other climbing in the area as well. This is the council 1920 to 1922. He left partway through his term in 1922, and the rumor was that his family was being threatened, and his house was on the other side of what's now the property, the area for Home Hardware, where they have their lumber on 2nd Street. Their house was over in that area. And there was a fire in there, and the rumor was that the fire was caused by somebody throwing like a Molotov cocktail through the basement window. And according to stories from his family, his children were threatened with kidnapping as well. And the reason it was that I heard for that was that he was trying to shut down the red light district. So because of the rumor is that because of the threats to his family, he sold his business and left town and moved to Westminster. This is 1921. He was greeting this adventurer, M.J. Lorraine, who traveled the entire Columbia River in a rowboat in 1921 and published a book on his adventures called The Columbia Unveiled in 1924. You can actually find the whole book online. I saw it there the other day. And here he is with the May Queen. They had big May Queen ceremonies at the park. It's about around 1920. That's the original grandstand at the park. And O.W. Abrahamson was mayor 1922 to 1924. He was a contractor. His brothers had come here in 1885 and started the Central Hotel on Front Street. He built the Agricultural Hall, which is now the Golf Clubhouse. He built the Revelstoke High School, which is later Mountain View School. And he also built the Queen Victoria Hospital. And Samuel Needham was mayor from 1929 to 1933. He came to Revelstoke in the 1880s with his family. He was still a boy when they came here and was one of the students in the first school that opened in 1889. He later opened the Needham warehouse, which is, the building is still there on Douglas Street, and was a contractor in town. He was also the fire chief for 41 years. During his time in office, the speed limit was raised to 20 miles per hour in town, and they had a $40,000 debenture to augment the municipal water supply by installing a 12-inch water main from Greeley Creek. I gotta tell this story. There was a story, whether it's true or not, it's a good story, that his father, when they came over from England, that he was missing these lovely bright yellow flowers that they used to have back home, so he arranged for some seeds to be sent over, and those yellow flowers were dandelions. And there's a story that says he's responsible for all the dandelions in Revelstoke, so it's probably not true, but it's a good story. And he was, as I say, he was the fire chief for 41 years, and then he passed the job to his son, Sam Needham Jr. in 1954. And Sam Needham Jr. was also involved in the city council for many years as well. Anselmo Pratolini was mayor in 1934 to 1936, and he was our first and so far only Italian mayor. He came to Canada in 1903 from northern Italy, and he came with several other men as trained stonemasons to build the stone arches in Rogers Pass to replace the original wooden trestles. And then he eventually went into business for himself and had Pratolini Construction, and in partnership with William Foote, who was that earlier mayor, who was also building contractor, they built the courthouse and Manning's and what's now the Taco Club and the bookstore, and quite a few other buildings in town. So they were both very skilled builders. This is his wife and two of their children. And he's also known for his family home that he built. It was until recently known as the Pink Castle. It's no longer pink, but on 2nd Street. And during his time in office, the film Silent Barriers was filmed. Of course, he was also mayor during the Depression years. And when the filming took place from this British film company, it created a lot of local employment and also a lot of excitement among the locals. So this takes us up to 1936. And we're going to leave it at there because the next mayor, Walter Hardman, was mayor for about 25 years. And I think he deserves a talk of his own, so we'll do that another day. So, thank you very much. There's an entire list of mayors up to the current. Any questions?